CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. France and Britain send naval ships to Jersey as the dispute over fishing intensifies.
Our other headlines: the EU considers waiving intellectual property rights and profits for COVID vaccines, but big drugs companies are furious.
How shoppers can save the rainforest. Food retailers take a stand against Brazil over deforestation in the Amazon.
Chancellor Merkel calls for a global carbon pricing to combat climate change as Germany toughens emissions targets. A row over post-Brexit fishing rights between the British island of Jersey and France has escalated, with military ships from both sides now gathered in the English Channel.
The UK Navy is monitoring the situation as around 60 French boats blockaded Jersey's main port, St Helier. Commercial vessels were unable to depart for several hours. Earlier, France threatened to cut off electricity supplies to the island if the dispute is not resolved.
Well, Jersey is the largest of the Channel Islands. It's a self-governing dependency of the UK, but lies just 20 kilometres off the coast of France. In a moment, our correspondent Andrew Wilson watching the UK response. First, let's talk to Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, what is going on here?
Well, Jamie, that blockade is now over. The French fishing boats have returned to port. Also returning are two French Navy vessels, which were also in attendance, perhaps shadowing the two British Royal Navy boats, which also attended the protest, mooring just a short distance away. But the protest might be over, but the situation is far from resolved. French fishermen far from happy. We've been hearing from a representative for fishermen based in Normandy, one of the French regions along that coast that has a coastline on the Channel and overlooks the Channel Islands. You can see one another from each other's coastline, and we've been hearing from that representative, which says that this is possibly risking deeper deadlock and retaliatory measures might be needed. We've been hearing from French fishermen throughout the day. They are unhappy, and we can hear now a little bit more from what another fisherman had to say.
Some boats will only be able to fish one type of fish when they used to fish 3 or 4, so it's not at all what had been agreed. So we're here to try and find a solution. We really hope this will be settled.
Ross, earlier this week we heard the French threatening to cut the electricity supply to the island. Strong words. Is the French government really backing the fishermen in this?
Well, Jamie, that comment was made by the French Maritime Minister Annick Girardin. She was saying that there's that threat the French could potentially wield to cut off Jersey's electricity. The island relies on France for about 95% of its energy needs. A real escalation in words on Tuesday, and she has been speaking again today. She said she's been recalling the Brexit deal between the European Union and the United Kingdom, saying that that deal provides for retaliatory measures in the case of non-compliance by one of the parties. But, she said, before the European Commission reaches that end, I urge the British authorities to reverse their decision. And she also added, maybe as a way of an olive branch, saying that France and Jersey for more than 150 years have enjoyed good neighbourly relations. Jamie?
Ross Cullen with a view from France. Thank you very much.
Let's bring in Andrew Wilson in the UK. What is the view from the UK, Andrew?
Well, Paul, I mean, there's an inevitability about this. It's just the timing that's unfortunate, and tempers have all flared. And in various parts of Europe, France particularly, and in the Channel Islands, things have got a bit out of control. Now, that moment should be past now. But obviously, even before Brexit, the fishermen in France and the Channel Islands and in the UK weren't happy about the deals that they were forced to fish under. The new, as it's known, trade and cooperation agreement agreed between the UK and Brussels hasn't turned up anything that anyone's particularly more happy with. That's come to a point now. One resolution that seems to have already taken place is that a delegation of Jersey politicians came down to the shoreline in St Helier and met with a delegation of French fishermen, and they had a conversation. Now, that's infinitely better than the current route of communication, which has been rather awkwardly Channel Islands to London, London to Brussels, Brussels to Paris, and then Paris to the fishing communities in Normandy. At least it manages to put the lid on some of the communication we've seen. The French vessels have gone away. The French naval vessels have withdrawn. The UK, the two offshore patrol ships are still well off the south coast of Jersey, monitoring the situation as a precautionary measure. And that's as far as the UK government is prepared to comment at this stage. However, this is, just like the Northern Ireland Protocol, something that in time will need resolution. Right now, Whitehall is working overtime to deal with the Northern Ireland Protocol and satisfy Northern Irish traders that they haven't been left out of the cold by the UK deal with Brussels in the separation. They're now going to have to do the same sort of thing, I fancy, with the French fishermen and with the communities in Jersey and Guernsey.
And Andrew, it's useful timing for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, isn't it, with Scotland and Wales voting in national elections and England going to the poll in local elections and a Westminster by-election taking place today?
Well, it's a good look, isn't it? We've got the Scottish parliamentary elections, 129 seats for the Scottish Parliament. That's an extraordinary important election, and the turnout so far, we understand, has been pretty high. Scottish voters there can vote for two things, one for their local MP and two for a party. They're doing that today. The Welsh Synod is up for grabs, 60 seats available there, and also across England, local council elections, considered a very important election period in the UK parliamentary calendar. 143 local councils, everyone going to vote for their local politicians there today. One by-election, a Westminster seat made vacant by someone who left their post early. 13 mayors across England are up, including the Mayor of London, so that's another big change that may be announced by the weekend, and 39 police and crime commissioners. Now, warships floating around off the coast is always a good look, I suppose, but the Prime Minister is aware of election campaigning rules. He's not going to make any more comments like that, but the newspapers, of course, are ready to have a field day with this. They've already mentioned comments in their headlines on the lines of British naval warships defending the islands of Jersey. I wouldn't be surprised if someone doesn't come up with the idea of remembering the fact that the Emperor Napoleon died exactly 200 years ago yesterday while in British captivity. You never know what the papers are going to come up with next.
Indeed not. Andrew Wilson in Oxford. Thank you.
The Bank of England says Britain is on track for its strongest growth since the Second World War. The bank has raised its GDP growth estimate for the year to 7.25%. That's up from an earlier forecast of 5%. Growth's being boosted by the successful rollout of COVID vaccines and easing lockdown restrictions. The bank has also kept its stimulus programme and benchmark interest rate unchanged.
Hundreds of Renault employees have been protesting outside the company's plant in Le Mans. They're demonstrating against the car maker's restructuring plans. Renault is slashing 15,000 jobs worldwide as part of a $2.4 billion cost-cutting programme. It comes after sales plunged during the pandemic.
Aston Martin's reported a rise in sales, posting a smaller first-quarter loss of $59 million. The car maker sold more than 1,300 vehicles in the first 3 months of this year, more than double the number sold in the same period last year. Its first SUV has helped boost the firm as it widens its appeal.
Most Rio Tinto shareholders have rejected the mining giant's executive pay packages. It follows a backlash over last year's destruction of an ancient rock shelter in Australia. Rio Tinto blasted the cave to expand an iron ore mine. It sparked condemnation and cost the jobs of its chief executive and two other senior managers.
India has admitted for the first time that a double mutant variant could be behind its devastating second wave of COVID. The admission comes after another grim record in the coronavirus crisis. India's reported more than 412,000 new cases and almost 4,000 daily deaths. COVID infections in the world's second most populous country have surged past 21 million. The death toll has risen above 230,000. But experts say the actual figures could be much higher.
Vaccinated people in Germany will soon live life to a different rulebook. No quarantines, no curfews, and fewer restrictions. It's caused a fierce debate in the country. Some say it's unfair to under 50s still waiting for a jab. From Frankfurt, Ryan Thompson reports.
There's a new divide among Germany's population, the haves and the have-nots of a COVID-19 vaccination certificate. Those with it could, as soon as this weekend, be subject to fewer restrictions, no quarantines, no curfews, and the right to travel and eat out. The controversial legislation going before the German Bundestag Thursday, Chancellor Angela Merkel and her government have pushed for it, saying it's no longer fair to limit people's freedoms if they no longer pose a public health risk.
We are talking about the fact that people in care homes can now eat together in the dining room after they have been isolated for months, or that the vaccinated can visit their mums on Mother's Day. This is an important step, and it is a constitutional right, and that is why this is urgently needed.
Though sluggish at the start, Germany's vaccination campaign is now on its way. Wednesday marked the second time that more than 1 million people were inoculated in a single day. But not everyone is happy with this decision. It will significantly affect young people who will likely be the last to be offered a vaccination appointment. The German vaccine calendar opens for all in early June, but it could take many weeks or months even for young people to get an appointment for their first dose. University students in Frankfurt say they understand both sides of the issue.
I do think it makes sense to give people opportunities to have their freedom back. But in the meantime, this could create a polarisation between people and lead to some negative outcomes.
I think it would be a bit unfair to have some people being able to go out in the night again and all the young people having to stay at home. And I think it's difficult, but I think it's better to give them the rights back.
But those who are not currently a priority may soon be in luck. A lack of interest in the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has pushed Germany's health ministry to rethink their ban for people under 60. The jab could be offered to everyone nationwide as soon as next week. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, going places again after lockdown. Are ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft finding the road to recovery?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Efforts to suspend patents for coronavirus vaccines are gaining momentum. The European Union and China both say they're willing to join the discussion. Beijing says it supports the focus on vaccine accessibility and expects all parties to discuss the issue under the WHO framework. This all comes as US President Joe Biden backed waiving intellectual property rights for COVID jabs following mounting domestic pressure. Biden's support sent shares in some pharmaceutical makers tumbling. Let's take you live to New York and our correspondent John Terrett. John, a major win for those countries that have been pushing for the waiving of patents and, let's be fair, profits. What's been the reaction there?
Well, certainly it's a win on the face of it, though I think ultimately it remains to be seen. I mean, look, clearly US foreign policy is changing. We've seen that with Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, in the Ukraine today, and it's clearly changing regarding global health policy as well. Now, the Biden administration is signaling that it's prepared to look at the issue of waiving patents on the vaccine drugs. On the one hand, that is unprecedented. On the other hand, you have to remember, I think at this point, it's just a gesture. That's all it is. It's just a gesture. So it's historic, certainly, that the US is prepared to fall into line behind India and South Africa, who've been in the vanguard of this movement, and we are told 100 other member countries of the World Trade Organization. And certainly as a result of the announcement from the Biden administration, the European Union seems to be falling into line as well. They're saying now that they're prepared to look at this issue, and I know that Tony Waterman is coming on from Brussels in just a moment to explain their position, because prior to this, the US, the EU and the UK were the three major holdouts when it came to waiving patents and intellectual property on vaccines. Now, Catherine Tai, who is the new US trade representative, says that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, but I have to tell you, certainly from this side of the Atlantic, you have to remember what she's saying is that the US is prepared to begin thinking about waiving the patents on vaccines, not necessarily that it will actually at the end of the day happen. You see, the Biden administration, I don't think they can force the drug makers here to fall into line. There is a domestic law that was brought in about 40 years ago by the Congress. It's to do with commandeering vaccines within the country, but I don't think it's ever been used, or if it has been used, it's certainly very seldomly used. So it's a little bit up in the air, Jamie and Paul.
Shares in some pharmaceutical companies have taken an absolute hammering. I suppose it's pretty obvious why they're opposed to suspending their intellectual property, their patents and their profits, potentially.
Well, Moderna, for example, is down 4% at the moment, and Pfizer is down 3%, and their shares fell pretty heavily yesterday, which was Wednesday, when this news first came out. I mean, you have to remember, though, we are a very, very long way from this actually taking place. The second paragraph in the document released by the trade representative, Catherine Tai, spoke about this could take some time. And I think that that's really the key to it here. That's the clue. The first meeting on this at the World Trade Organization is not until next month. So we have this urgent situation going on, but they're not going to meet about changing the rules with 160 plus countries until next month. Meanwhile, the need for the vaccines, of course, getting them out around the world is urgent and very much needed now. And certainly that's what the drug companies here will tell you.
John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
The European Union says it's ready to discuss a proposal for a vaccine waiver, but so far it's stopped short of endorsing the US decision. Let's talk to Tony Waterman, our correspondent in Brussels. So, Tony, the EU now says it's willing to look at the proposal, but unlike other countries, has yet to throw its backing behind it. Why not?
Well, Paul, Europe has long contended that suspending intellectual property protections, essentially giving away the secrets on how these vaccines are made, would stifle innovation. And when we're talking about Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna, we're talking about new cutting-edge mRNA technology that a lot of companies, a lot of countries have not yet mastered, and which could be, exceptionally profitable in the future. Brussels also feels that these waivers wouldn't necessarily solve the supply problem or speed up global vaccination like supporters of the waivers claim that they would. They say that the only way to solve these issues is to actually try and expand capacity, which is something that they've been trying to do internally inside the bloc for a while now. Ultimately, the solution that they are looking for is this so-called third wave that the new Director General of the WTO has been promoting. And under this approach, vaccine manufacturing would be licensed to companies, to countries perhaps, and it would be all done under a framework of multilateral rules. This is sort of the have your cake and eat it too solution, because supporters say that this would ensure that there are adequate supplies, but also would be able to protect intellectual property rights. But now that the U.S. Is throwing its weight behind this proposal, as John was saying, which was first brought up by India and South Africa last year, it's really just the EU and the UK at this point, which are the major developed economies that are standing in the way of this really moving forward, which is why I think you heard from the Commission President today, Ursula von der Leyen, saying that they're willing to discuss any options that are on the table. Take a listen.
The European Union is also ready to discuss any proposal that address the crisis in an effective and pragmatic manner. And that's why we are ready to discuss how the US proposal for waiver on intellectual property protection for COVID vaccines could help achieve that objective. In the short run, however, we call upon all vaccine-producing countries to allow exports and to avoid measures that disrupt supply chains.
Well, that was just a little bit of a dig there to the United States, the UK, and to some extent India, because all of those countries have some sort of policies in place right now which are limiting either the export of finished vaccines or vaccine making materials and supplies. And Europe is very much saying, look, we're exporting, we're doing our job here. We may not be behind the waivers, but we're exporting a lot of vaccines at this point, and you guys should be doing the same exact thing.
And Tony, Ursula von der Leyen's also been praising the EU's vaccine rollout. What has she said?
Well, she said today that we have now surpassed the threshold of 200 million doses, which have been delivered across the bloc. So that would be almost enough vaccine doses to immunize half of the population and give them at least one dose. And she also said that as these 200 million doses have gone out, that the bloc has also exported 200 million doses abroad. The Brussels received a lot of flack when it measures where these pharmaceutical companies had to seek permission every time they wanted to export vaccine doses outside of the bloc. This is their way of showing that they are keeping their word about being open, transparent, making sure these vaccines are getting out to where they are most needed. It's also a defense for them because they received a lot of criticism as well in the early stages of this immunization program, that it was bungled, that it wasn't done properly. And this is their way of saying, you know, things are picking up pace. We're starting to vaccinate people here. We're also still expecting in the coming days this new deal with Pfizer, 1.8 billion doses through 2023. These would be doses that would be booster shots. They would be aimed at really fighting the variants which are emerging in the future.
OK, many thanks, Tony. Tony Waterman in Brussels.
China says it remains committed to the investment deal signed with the EU last year. The EU earlier denied reports that it had suspended efforts to pass the deal, saying work to review and translate the agreement is ongoing.
But Brussels also insisted the ratification process can't be separated from the broader China-EU relationship. Beijing said the deal will unlock huge benefits for both sides.
中欧投资协定的本质
The China-EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment aims to be mutually beneficial to China, the European Union and to the world. China is willing to communicate and cooperate with the EU to bring the deal into effect as early as possible, to benefit people from both sides and to send a positive signal to the international community that China supports maintaining an open global economy.
Ride-hailing services are showing some signs of recovery as coronavirus restrictions are eased. Both Uber and Lyft have reported narrower first-quarter losses than expected. Uber says its food delivery business is growing, but ride-hailing bookings are rather flat, although March was its best month on record, while Lyft says it'll become profitable in the third quarter, 3 months before Uber. Well, let's talk to Santosh Rao, Head of Research at Manhattan Venture Partners. Santosh, good to see you. Both Uber and Lyft results better than expected. What do you make of their post-pandemic recovery prospects?
Yeah, I think from both companies, we saw that the demand side of the equation is picking up. I mean, there's some softness here and there, but overall, I think the demand is picking up, and that's expected. The Uber is becoming a super app, which is doing very well. Lyft is well positioned as a pure play in a country that has the best unit economics. So both companies are well positioned in their markets, but the issue is something else. There's some overhanging issues, which is the regulatory labor classification issue that's overhang here, and also the demand, the supply, the driver supply side. That's driving up costs, that's affecting the take rates. So I think those are two factors that need to be addressed. I think that's why you're seeing some weakness in the stock today. Investors need to see how that plays out over the long term, over the short term. In the long term, both companies are well positioned to go up.
Well, let's just drill down into two of those issues. President Biden's been promising to protect gig economy workers like Uber and Lyft drivers. I mean, there is trouble ahead on the road, isn't there? How do you see this battle playing out?
Yeah, there is I mean, they want to reverse what Trump had passed. But I think it's not a done deal yet. There's no consensus on this issue, even in the Biden administration. We'll see how it plays out. The drivers, in general, overall, like their flexibility, like the ability to work for different companies. So I think that they don't want to give up the freedom. Yes, there is a section of the drivers that wants the security of a job. So I think that's going to play out over a long term. But at the end of the day, it's the value proposition that these companies bring to the table, and it won't be there if the labor costs go up and they are treated as employees. So I think that has to be weighed. We can see that there's been a fundamental change in consumer habits. Uber and Lyft are part of our lifestyles, so that's not going away. So I think there's a balancing act that needs to be done all over the country, all over the world, in fact. So these companies are here to stay. Let's see how it plays out. But the odds still favor that things will be a hybrid solution in between, something like the Prop 22 that passed in California.
Now, you touched on this earlier. Both companies don't have enough drivers to meet the demand. I mean, that's going to be a real worry down the line, isn't it?
Yes, it is a concern, and that's why they're increasing the incentives, which is driving up costs, impacting take rates. So that's, I said, in the term, there are a number of issues that needs to play out, and the stocks are going to be range-bound because they need to sort that out. Drivers and the companies are giving enough incentives, but that, again, is a function of the vaccination rates, the safety factor, how much comfortable people are, the drivers are. So all that is going to come into play as the economies open up, the markets open up. I think things will come back to normal. There is still high unemployment. There is demand for drivers and keeping them away. So all that will come into play, I think, in the next 3 months as things open up more and more and the safety factor gets better. You'll see drivers come back to work.
Lyft and Uber both say they hope to become profitable later this year. Do you go along with that? What's your take?
Yeah, I think they can. They have cut costs quite a bit. And you saw that here in this quarter. So they're doing a good job on that end. So they just need to see how they can manage the driver costs at this point. I think they're way down the line. It's not going to be resolved anytime soon. The immediate concern is the cost of these drivers, the supply side, like I said. So I think that needs to be sorted out. But at this point, both companies have reiterated their target of being EBITDA positive by the end of the year. So I think they're on track for that.
Santosh Rao in New York, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Now, can shoppers save the Amazon? Dozens of European food retailers have threatened Brazil with a boycott of agricultural products should it pass a land reform bill, which they argue would worsen deforestation. With more on that, here's Juliette Mann.
Thanks, Paul. Well, yes, an open letter has been sent to Brazil's National Congress, reinstating a threat to stop sourcing products like beef and soy from Brazil over proposed land reforms, which could mean further destruction of the Amazon rainforest. So Sainsbury's, Aldi, Asda, Tesco, Lidl, Greggs, Co-op, the British Retail Consortium and the Hilton Food Group, they're just some of those major organisations who have signed that open letter. Here's the big picture. In the last 12 months to August 2020, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon increased 9.5%. That's an area larger than Jamaica. And this year alone, 174,000 hectares of the Amazon have been logged or burned. Now, President Bolsonaro has slashed funding for environmental programs since he took office in 2019, and he's pushing to open protected lands to mining and to agribusiness. And all that despite recommitting at a US summit last month to a previous goal of stopping illegal deforestation by 2030. Well, Peter Andrews is Head of Sustainability at the British Retail Consortium.
The Brazilian government are proposing a law that would provide an amnesty to those people who have previously been engaging in illegal logging, land grabs and deforestation of the Amazon. And this law, we feel, that would have a hugely detrimental impact on one of the most sort of biodiverse areas of the world, an area that is protecting or will have a significant impact on our global climate. And actually, if it is lost, will have a devastating impact on climate change and global warming.
Of course, it's easy to sign a letter, but this isn't the first time that UK food businesses have taken a stand. You've prevented a version of this bill before, haven't you?
That's right. Last year, a similar bill was put forward to the Brazilian Senate, and at the time, a huge backlash came about, not just through British companies, but also through people from civil society in Brazil, through Brazilian agribusinesses and global companies. So I think the Brazilian government heard then this massive opposition to that proposal and decided it wasn't the right thing to do at the time. So we're sad that this bill has been brought back this time, but we hope that through, again, demonstrating that massive demand for keeping the Amazon protections intact, that we can successfully see this bill withdrawn again.
Now, in terms of what you're boycotting, it isn't about looking for Made in Brazil labels, is it, in supermarkets? Just explain the supply chain, the supply line, if you like, from Brazil to our supermarket shelves.
That's right. So one of the biggest sort of imports into the UK from Brazil in terms of agriculture is soybeans. They are brought into the UK for feed, for our poultry, for our pigs, for our cattle, that ends up being in the meat on our supermarket shelves. So customers won't necessarily be directly purchasing it when they go into their local supermarket, but it will be embedded within the meat that they do buy.
What about other environmental actions? Because you and organisations like yours, they've been part of disrupting palm oil. There's a big drive to reduce single-use plastic. So what other action do you think could lead to change?
More and more people are environmentally aware. We know that governments are regulating more and more around environmental issues, and we know that other sort of interests parties are already focused on what we can do to protect and safeguard our environment. So when we look at a situation like protecting the rainforest, we know how vital it is for climate change, we know how vital it is for protecting biodiversity, and we know that we do have an influence over how governments think about protecting or not protecting, in this case, their natural habitat. So that's where we can utilise the influence of businesses working together with civil society to encourage change or encourage stronger protections of our natural environment.
So we've got 40 UK food businesses all clubbing together here behind this campaign, which is interesting because the supermarkets, they're usually at each other's throats, certainly in the UK, when it comes to price wars and things like that. But this is an example where they are collaborating and cooperating together to get some environmental action.
Juliet Mann, thank you very much. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Whose judges are they anyway? Poland, the EU, and a row about the law of the land.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh,
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. The headlines again. A blockade by French fishing ships is lifted after Paris and London send naval ships to Jersey. But the dispute is far from over.
The EU considers waiving intellectual property rights and profits for COVID-19 vaccines, but big drugs companies are furious.
And food retailers take a stand against Brazil over deforestation in the Amazon. Germany's Chancellor has called for a global carbon pricing system. Angela Merkel was speaking at the Europe in a Changing World event in Berlin alongside other leaders and the UK's Boris Johnson. The event to discuss joint strategy ahead of the forthcoming COP26 summit in Glasgow later this year comes as Germany announces it's bringing forward its date for net zero emissions by 5 years. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray, who's following the story for us. Trent, tell us more about what the leaders have been discussing.
Yeah, well, this event very much is the warm-up event to COP26, like you mentioned there in Glasgow. It's an opportunity for leaders to get together and take stock of where the world is at in terms of climate change policies. And Boris Johnson and Angela Merkel both joined today and were in stiff agreement with one another that while there has been progress in much of Europe, a lot more needs to be done in the developing world. In fact, Boris Johnson said he would be using the upcoming G7 meeting to bend the ear of other world leaders to help put together a big pile of cash to help those developing nations with things like green finance and investment in renewable energy. But it is that suggestion by Chancellor Angela Merkel that the world does need to move towards a CO2 price that is making headlines. Of course, she's referring to the fact that Europe has had a price on carbon now since 2005. Essentially, big polluters have to pay to put carbon into the atmosphere. Per tonne of carbon recently hit 50 euros, the highest it's been. Frankly, it has never been a more expensive time to be polluting in Europe. Angela Merkel now hoping to take that kind of carrot and stick approach globally. Of course, though, she will have some work to do trying to convince others. She herself accepted it would be a step-by-step process.
And Trent, the timing of all this is significant, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is, certainly here in Germany, because in recent days we have seen the government here commit to bringing forward their climate change goals. Previously, Germany wanted to be a carbon neutral country by 2050. They have brought that forward 5 years now and say 2045 is the new target. Two reasons for that. The first is the highest court here recently ruled that the German government targets weren't high enough to ensure a healthy life for future generations, and so they asked the government to go back to the drawing board. But I think more pressingly is the fact that we do have an election coming up in September, and the German Green Party has enjoyed a meteoric rise here in recent months. They recently selected their candidate, Annalena Baerbock, and she has in fact leapfrogged Angela Merkel's Conservative parties to take the first spot in the poll. So I think we will see a real concerted effort in coming weeks for all of the main parties here to really rethink their green policies, because clearly it is a top agenda issue for German voters. So if you are a voter who is interested in environmental and ecological issues, I suspect you'll have a very exciting election campaign coming up.
And Chancellor Angela Merkel steps off the world stage soon. I wonder how significant will her departure be for this agenda?
Yeah, well, during this meeting today, we heard from several environment ministers from Japan, from Singapore, Switzerland, Costa Rica, and they all, in their opening statements, paid tribute to Angela Merkel for her leadership in climate change, of course, over her 16 years as Chancellor. She, I think, appreciated that, and there was one point in the conversation where they were asking her about her work as the Environment Minister back in 1997, when she helped try and push through the Kyoto Protocol all the way back then. And Angela Merkel recited that time. She had all of the facts and figures, and for her it was an event that happened yesterday in her mind. This is an issue that she has really been a pet issue of hers for a long time. She is right across the details, so she will leave some very big shoes to fill, I think, when it comes to Europe's biggest economy, Germany, continuing to lead on climate change.
Trent Murray in Berlin, thank you very much.
So with China, the EU and US all agreed on the goal of climate neutrality, how can their individual strategies converge? Susie Kerr is chief economist at the non-profit Environmental Defence Fund.
I think it's very important that we have more carbon pricing schemes as part of the policy mix and it's also extremely important that we have mechanisms where we can effectively transfer resources from rich countries like New Zealand or the United States or Europe to poorer countries. Most of the emissions reductions that are going to happen in future are in developing and emerging economies, and on their own they don't have the resources or the capability to reduce those emissions as fast as we would really like them to.
Global carbon trading hasn't really worked so far. What is needed for a change?
It hasn't worked so far, partly because it has depended on project-based trading mechanisms, which are terrifically complex. They involve a lot of paperwork and checks. The real trades we need are between the North and the South, and countries in the South don't have strong regulatory systems, so they're not going to have emissions trading systems that could link up in the near future. We need different mechanisms for those sorts of transfers of resources.
What do you make of Germany's surprise decision to bring its climate neutrality goal forward by 5 years?
I think that this is something we always see before COPs, and it's a very, very welcome thing always to see more ambition, particularly if it can lead others to mimic that. And what I'd love to see out of this COP is people moving beyond the long-term commitments, which are an excellent start, but moving into thinking about the implementation, not saying what we're going to do, but how exactly we're going to do that, and getting concrete plans in place and seeing real action on the ground.
How could closer cooperation between the big global powers, namely China, the United States and EU, work? So
there's enormous potential for them to achieve a lot more together than they have apart. So in the space of emissions trading, they can increase the transparency of their systems so that they can support more ambitious targets within those systems. There's a lot of learning that can still be done in terms of policy effectiveness. Also, all three of those groups, the China, the EU and the US, hopefully will quite soon get policies in place where they're really reaching the limits of the reductions that they can do within their own countries. The European Union is actually getting close to that point now. They have prices in their emissions trading system of between 40 and 50 euros. Additional rapid reductions within Europe are going to be really expensive. And then China the EU and the US can really design that international transfer system. They can take the initiative to create rules, agreed approaches to international transfers that enable them to happen on a much larger scale and with really good environmental integrity. Because it's not enough to say that it's difficult, we actually have to solve this problem.
France is expanding the number of people eligible for COVID vaccines. Everyone over 50 can come forward from Monday. This move comes 5 days ahead of schedule. And as the French president visited a vaccination centre in Paris, close to 17 million people, nearly a third of the population, have now received their first dose in France.
Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong will face an additional 10 months in jail for participating in an unauthorised assembly in June last year. Police broke up the gathering because it contravened coronavirus rules. Wong, who is 24, is already in prison on other illegal assembly convictions and is among 47 activists charged under the city's national security law.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States wants to increase security assistance to Ukraine. On a visit to Kiev, he's been meeting the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Blinken also said that Russia had left significant numbers of troops and equipment near Ukraine's border, despite announcing a withdrawal last month.
Thousands have been protesting in Greece against the new law relaxing rules on working hours. Civil servants and public transport workers went on strike for the day, causing traffic gridlock in Athens. Unions say the law will formalise exploitation through unpaid overtime.
The Polish government's efforts to change its judicial system has been dealt a blow after the EU's legal advisor said giving the ruling party power to discipline judges is not in line with the EU's practices. The issue has been a long-running dispute between Warsaw and Brussels. Penelope Liech reports.
A top legal advisor to the European Union handed down a non-binding opinion on Thursday that Poland's regime of disciplining judges is in contrary to European law. It's the latest development in an ongoing dispute between the bloc and Poland's ruling party over reforms to the justice system that gives authorities new power over courts. Poland's governing Law and Justice Party created a new body within the Supreme Court in 2017. It's called the Disciplinary Chamber and holds the power to discipline judges. The Disciplinary Chamber is made up of judges selected by Poland's National Council of Judiciary. The members of that body are chosen by the Parliament, where the Law and Justice Party holds the majority. Poland's ruling party has said the chamber was implemented as it seeks to reform an inefficient and corrupt justice system. However, critics have argued it's a way to seize control of the courts, with judges in Poland reporting they fear the system could be used as a tool to pressure court officials to rule in favour of authorities. The European Commission brought a complaint against the Court of Justice over the issue, concerned that independence and impartiality cannot be guaranteed within the disciplinary chamber. Today's recommendation ruled that the creation of the chamber within the Supreme Court is not in line with EU law. While the recommendation is not legally binding, it will be considered by the court. Supporters of judicial independence were outside the court and urged judges to uphold European standards in Poland. Judges of the EU court will now deliberate on the case. A ruling is expected to be handed down later in the year. Penelope Liech, CGTN.
The International Criminal Court has sentenced a Ugandan war criminal to 25 years imprisonment. The court convicted Dominic Ongwen of multiple crimes against humanity, as Stefan de Vries reports.
It took more than 4 years, but on Thursday the trial against Dominic Ongwen finally came to a close in The Hague. The case was highly complicated, with thousands of victims. Dozens of witnesses accused the former child soldier and commander from Uganda of horrible acts. Ongwen was found guilty of no less than 61 crimes against humanity, including attacks against the civilian population, murder, enslavement, torture, pillaging and persecution. Ongwen always denied the allegations and said he was a victim himself before becoming a perpetrator. He had been abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA, when he was around 10 years old, and in their judgment the bench said they had considered this fact. In Uganda, Ongwen led a brigade of the LRA, and, according to the court, there exists no ground excluding Dominic Ongwen's criminal responsibility. His guilt has been established beyond any reasonable doubt. Despite victims of his crimes demanding the court impose a complete life sentence, he was given 25 years. But having already spent 6 years behind bars, he will be released in 2040. Even today, the LRA remains active in South Sudan, the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Since 1987, it has killed at least 100,000 people and kidnapped many more. The army's founder, Joseph Kony, is still on the run. The many victims may find some peace in Thursday's sentence, yet many will not rest until all criminals have been caught, brought to court and tried in The Hague, just like Dominic Ongwen on Thursday. Stefan de Vries, CGTN, Amsterdam.
Is this the future of modern warfare? British developers working with the Royal Navy have been testing a new jet suit off the south coast of England. Aimed at replacing the role currently played by helicopters in boarding missions, the suit allows Marines to fly over boats and land quickly while reaching speeds of 80 miles an hour. To see more, europe.cgtn.com. And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. Also on YouTube and Dailymotion and, of course, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, just in time, how China became the world's biggest market for Swiss watches.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe. It's one of the world's biggest shop windows, showcasing products from nearly 1,500 companies from all around the world. The first China International Consumer Products Expo is underway now in Haikou, capital of China's Hainan province. It's also the first big expo to be held on Hainan since China set out plans to turn it into a global trade port by 2050.
Well, the Chinese mainland is now the world's largest market for Swiss watches, overtaking Hong Kong for the first time. Switzerland, a leading manufacturer of premium products, wants to tap further into China's growing purchasing power, and it sees the Hainan Expo as key to this. Huang Fei reports.
So Switzerland will have a huge presence at the Expo. What can we expect from the delegation, and what do you hope to accomplish there?
The topic of international consumer products is actually very attractive for Switzerland because Switzerland is a leading manufacturer of premium consumer products. And we hope with this presence at Hainan Expo to further increase the interest of Swiss brands for the potential of Hainan, of Hainan Free Trade Zone. And of course also we would like to create much more visibility for Swiss brands in Hainan and also in China.
So China has plans to make Hainan its biggest free trade area, featuring favorable tariff and tax policies. What does this mean for Swiss companies?
So Hainan Free Trade Zone has a good potential for Swiss brands to increase their market share in China, and it may be an attractive test location for Swiss newcomers on the Chinese market, so companies which are not yet present in the Chinese market, and therefore represents an excellent business opportunity for them.
China is the world's biggest consumer market and the only major economy to bounce back quite quickly after the pandemic. Many countries are vying for that piece of the pie. What are the Swiss advantages in winning over the Chinese consumers?
You're right. China is very important for the Swiss luxury sector, in particular also for famous international Swiss luxury brands, especially also in the watch sector. But there are also other smaller but also leading Swiss brands which don't have yet a presence in China. And we would like to support especially these brands by providing them attractive platforms such as the Swiss National Pavilion at Hainan Expo, by giving them access to Chinese e-commerce channels, or also by offering them public endorsement, such as, for example, our status of guest country of honor at Hainan Expo.
And finally, as communities seek to repair the damage caused by the economic damage caused by the pandemic, one Japanese town is putting its faith in a giant squid statue. Authorities in Noto spent more than $200,000 on the 9-metre-long mollusk monument, part of a government coronavirus relief programme. Officials say the calamari colossus will help boost tourism in the coastal town, where flying squid is a local delicacy.
And we'll stay with the fish theme for our final headlines. A blockade by French fishing ships has lifted after Paris and London sent naval ships to Jersey, but the dispute is far from over. The EU considers waiving intellectual property rights and profits for COVID-19 vaccines, but big drugs companies are furious. And food retailers take a stand against Brazil over deforestation in the Amazon.
That is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're also on YouTube and Dailymotion and CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.